morning, everyone. All right. So I'm here to talk to you about updates with what's been going on with the ISG since we last spoke in Tokyo. In 6 months, we have had another meeting. We had one just recently this spring in my old stomping grounds in Columbia, Maryland, hosted by Vectorworks. The picture you'll see here is, if you don't know American television, we have an IFC channel in America. And it just happened to be that during our stay, the programming included Mission Impossible and Gladiator. It does explain our meetings sometimes very well. Our next meeting will be in the fall, hosted by Trimble in Helsinki. We're looking forward to that. And I'll give you a few updates on why we're really looking forward to it, because we have some new initiatives coming up. Now, you should be familiar with this slide if you've been to a number of these meetings before. And since I became the chair of the implementation support group, I've really wanted to emphasize these three themes, both internally and to the rest of the community. And the ideas of agility, engagement, and growth has been this idea of how do we make sure that the ISG is doing things that the community values, that we are responding to those community needs, and that the ISG is not just the same small group of 12 vendors or 14 or 15 vendors, but that we continue to reach further and further out globally to make sure that all of the users in all of the markets have their needs met by local and global developers. So we had an interesting new initiative pop up in this meeting, and one of the members, Graphisoft, put forward this proposal of using BIM snippets, using BCF to what they call an IFC command, right? And the idea is using JSON commands within the BCF snippet to change properties. So somebody said, well, does this mean partial model exchange? Let's temper it a bit. The interesting thing is that this is an initial proof of concept that they worked on with Celebri. And the even more interesting part of that is during the discussion, the Autodesk representative, Angel Velez, he's around here somewhere, spoke up and said, you know, this is something very interesting. I would be more than happy to work with you on developing it further. And the idea is that they can then work together as a small group to further refine the specifications, further refine the mechanisms, and then be able to show this beyond just the initial proof of concept, right? To me, this is a big deal. Because I think what it shows again, and what we try to emphasize, is that within our community, within the buildingSMART community, within the ISG, competitors can work together, right? We can work together in good faith to provide solutions. It is not unusual. It is not impossible. We also had a presentation about a new project that is happening in the United States, I'm also personally involved in, and that is the State Highway Association called AASHTO. Some of you are familiar with it, many of you are not. In America, we have the federal level agencies and we have the state level agencies. And the states will often join together to do work that doesn't necessarily happen with the federal agency. And in this case, there's an initiative to bring BIM to road construction, and specifically for bridges and structures. And it is seen as an opportunity as the first or a test implementation of IFC 4.2 for bridges. So this is very exciting. We just started this year. It's a 5-year project. We're still trying to figure out when that initial implementation and software will be, what the MVDs look like, which MVDs we'll focus on, but I'm very excited about this. We already have a number of vendors on board. We're looking to bring more vendors on board as we look at the entire life cycle and which vendors would be interested in participating. In conjunction with that, The AASHTO groups, FHWA, are getting more and more interest in how they can become involved in what BSI is doing in the BSI process, right? This idea of how can the things that we do in the U.S., through the chapter, through all these different initiatives at the federal and the state level, instead of coming up with their own standards and instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, how can they engage, leverage what we are doing here in our communities in BSI, and also provide feedback and further enrich that knowledge. So in this context of the BSI standards process, we've talked more and more about, as we revise this, of getting vendors involved earlier and earlier on, right? This early engagement. And with the idea being is that when you engage the vendors earlier, you give them more time to consider the ideas of these projects, whether they're schema extensions, whether they're model view definitions, doesn't matter. The earlier that they're engaged, the easier it is for them to prepare their software when implementation is required. So Richard had showed this, this graph before. The idea is if we can bring them in with ideas, with a process that says we start here are the ideas that we have, and as we go through the development process, we involve them more and more. It's a win-win situation for everyone, so that we don't just continue a process where users get together, they put together a bunch of their needs, and then they just sort of throw it over the wall at the vendors and say, okay, here, now we need it done. It's not an effective process. What's more effective is that when we work together and we communicate earlier and we begin to develop, maybe even prototype, but we see where we can more quickly get to those solutions and do testing. And as Greg has pointed out for the past couple of years, is we should be doing software first testing before we go to a final standard. We have an ISO process that has candidate standard status, allows us to do implementation and testing, and then move on to final standard. Let's leverage that. And we have mechanisms to do that. We can set up the processes to do that. Richard mentioned this earlier on Monday. Yes, the new technical website is up. The old one isn't quite down yet, but the new one is up. And this will be our main communications to the technical community. There will be information that the general community should be able to grasp on there as well. I want it to be total techno-speak, if you will, but there has to be a level of resources that the development community needs, but I also don't want it to be completely alienating the rest of the BSI community. So over time, we'll begin to build this out more and more. We'll add more information about all the different initiatives, about all the different bits and pieces that we deal with on the technical side. At the same time, in conjunction with that, forums. Now, many of you have started signing up this week for the forums. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Spread the word. As I said, in managing this, I can tell you that we are very flexible with this tool. We can begin to add more categories. We can begin to move things around if we have to. But we really see this as an engagement tool across the entire community, even for the development community in the ISG. We have categories in there in which we can begin to discuss these initiatives. We can start logging items or ideas about how do we improve things for the next version, or how do we address certain concerns with people, how do we fix things, how do we provide tools for people. We want that end user engagement. This is the opportunity to do that in a very open way. And then the third point of growth. We had a very exciting presentation. I see Neil over there in the audience. If you haven't met Neil yet this week, please try to talk to him before you all leave. The Open Design Alliance gave a presentation about their move to now support IFC in their toolkit. What does that mean? Well, when you look at it, many of the developers who are already a part of BSI use ODA's tools for translation in other areas, DWG, DGN, and others. This is a big deal. Is it a huge game changer? I don't know. But we have now, we're discussing about how we can leverage what ODA is doing along with all of their customers to then address all of the needs of the larger BSI community. I'm really looking forward to that. So if you have any other further questions, please feel free to reach out to us on the forums, which we'd really prefer, because as I said, as a communication tool, we can collect these things. There's a provenance to them. There's a history that we can go through. They're searchable. It's a great tool. Otherwise, you can email me at technical@buildingsmart.org, technical@buildingsmart.org, or my Gmail address. Thank you.